So on the ovary, we have the two structures, like I just said. We have the follicle. The follicle has the ova and it grows, and it looks like a bubble because it becomes filled with this liquid. And so it gets bigger and bigger until it ruptures. And that rupturing is at ovulation. When it's growing through all of this, it is producing estrogen. So that is the main hormone that is being produced and secreted by the follicle. Once it ovulates, it turns into this corpus luteum, which is a yellow body. And this corpus luteum is what's producing progesterone. And these are the two main hormones that we are going to be concerned with coming from the ovary. So these are on the left side again, these are just what they actual structures look like. When you look at the outside, follicles just can be little bubbles all the way to bigger bubbles. And then they can be a corpus luteum. And it has this little part that sticks out, kind of, I call it the hilus. And then the corpus luteum is actually much larger inside the ovary down here. And you can see it has a part that sticks out where ovulation occurred, and then it has a body down under the ovary. And again, it is yellow. Corpus luteum literally translates to yellow body. In the brain, we have the hypothalamus and the pituitary. The hypothalamus sits up into the brain, where the pituitary actually is not cranial in origin. And so it actually moves from kind of the mouth and the developing embryo up in contact with the brain. And so they communicate very closely to regulate various bodily functions, but specifically for us, for regulating reproduction. Okay, nope, not here. All right, so
I'm here at Stanford.
Oh, don't talk. Okay. Which brings us to what we call the HPG axis. It's the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, and this is the cycle that completely controls what's going on and it's how we communicate from the brain and the pelvic organs back to the brain. Now, the hypothalamus will release a hormone known as gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH, which communicates with the anterior pituitary gland here. In response to the GnRH, the pituitary will release two hormones. It will release luteinizing hormone, or LH, and follicular stimulating hormone, or FSH. It sends these hormones into the bloodstream, which then travel down to the gonad in both the males and the females. Now, this is going to show you more specifically the HPG axis. Thank you, Julie. That was very kind. This is going to show you the HPG axis. So we have the hypothalamus up in the brain. And it releases GnRH. I'm so sorry, guys. It releases GnRH, which communicates with the pituitary gland. And again, we're most concerned with this anterior pituitary gland. So GnRH will positively stimulate this gland to release the other two hormones. No. This is awful. I thought we were doing well today too with the background noise. All right, so the pituitary gland will then release LH and FSH, so luteinizing hormone and follicular stimulating hormone, which will positively act on the ovary. Right. So when it acts on the ovary then is going to produce estrogen or progesterone, depending on what stage it's in. And estrogen and progesterone then feed back into both the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland to regulate this cycle. And we end up creating a positive feedback loop or a negative feedback loop, depending on what structure is present in the ovary and what hormone is most prominent. your module, you'll watch a video more about what a positive feedback loop is, but it's basically a way that the body can regulate how much of a hormone or signal is being sent. And you can think of it like a thermostat. If it will be kept at a certain level, if that level's off, then it will be able to stimulate either more or less of the required hormone. Now, when we talk about positive feedback, we see estrogen, and estrogen most commonly is positively feedback, providing positive feedback in a mature female or a male, and well, female in this case. And when it does, that stimulates the body to produce more signals to produce more progesterone. Progesterone, however, is more commonly seen as a negative feedback regulator because when progesterone is present and feeding back into the brain and the pituitary, then it's going to kind of slow down the production. When we think about this in a female, FSH and LH are present in males as well, as we'll see, but in the female, FSH is responsible for recruiting and the growth and maintenance of the follicles as they grow from smaller sizes to be larger. And then once they get larger, LH becomes dependent. As LH is increasing, once the follicle gets big enough with enough estrogen to feed back onto the hypothalamus, it will allow or be kind of permissive of the brain initiating what we call the LH surge, which is a very large amount of LH that gets released from the pituitary gland that will lead to ovulation. So the LH surge will happen just before ovulation occurs. What we see is when we've gone in, well, researchers have gone in and looked at these patterns of these hormones. And what they do is they can come in and they'll give a GnRH surge, and they're measuring the GnRH, they're measuring the LH and FSH in the blood, in the system of these animals. And every time they saw a spike in GnRH, there was even a greater surge in LH. And so this spike in GnRH followed by a spike in LH would lead to ovulation in these animals. It's kind of similar in the male. We have the hypothalamus and pituitary. There are some differences in the hypothalamus out of the scope of this class, but there's a such thing as a masculine or a feminine hypothalamus, basically. The hypothalamus still releases GnRH, which is positively feeds onto the pituitary. The anterior pituitary also releases FSH and LH. FSH acts on the Sertoli cells and LH and Leydig cells. So those are just two specialized cells in the testicles. And those cells will then produce testosterone. And all of this happens again in the gonad. Testosterone then can most commonly negatively feedback on the hypothalamus or the pituitary gland. Again, testosterone is the primary hormone here. And LH is the main signal for the testes to produce that testosterone. So FSH is important, but LH is that main signal. FSH is required for sperm production. Now, if we want to look at this, we talk about this concept of being cyclic or estrocyclicity in a cow. A cycle is basically measured from going from when an animal ovulates to when an animal ovulates again. So ovulation to ovulation. In a cow, this is 21 days. So about day 0 ovulation, day 21, right at ovulation again. We have two major phases. We have the follicular phase, which is the phase just before ovulation. And then we have what we call the luteal phase. The follicular phase is obviously dominated by follicles. So the follicles that are going to ovulate, or the one, if it's a monovulatory species, is going to be very large here. Estrogen, as you can see by the chart, becomes very high. during this period. Once ovulation occurs, as you saw in the ovary previously, that corpus luteum is formed. So progesterone concentrations will decline because the follicle is no longer growing, it has ruptured, and progesterone is going to increase because the corpus luteum is now present. It's growing and present and becoming stronger. So it's going to produce progesterone. And the majority of the estrous cycle is dominated by the presence of progesterone, or dominated by this luteal phase. So two phases, follicular phase and luteal phase. Follicular phase is just before ovulation, dominated by the follicles and high estrogen. Luteal phase is dominated by the corpus luteum and high amounts of progesterone. Now, we have another hormone I'm introducing here. It's called prostaglandin F2 alpha, or PGF2 alpha. It is a hormone that gets sent from the uterus. To initiate this process, we call luteolysis or luteolysis, depending on how you want to say it. Luteolysis is simply the regression of the CL. And so the corpus luteum is present, producing this progesterone, it increases, and then it will get the signal initiated by the uterus of prostaglandin F2 alpha, which basically tells it to die. And so it'll die so that the follicles from the next phase can dominate, estrogen can rise, and ovulation can occur again. And this keeps happening over and over and over again. Now, if the animal was to become pregnant, at this point, after this ovulation, there's a breeding, it becomes pregnant, the corpus luteum would still form, but instead of dying, that corpus luteum will be maintained for at least part of, if not the entire pregnancy. And so progesterone, that's why we call it the hormone of pregnancy, because that luteal tissue is going to still be present and not die like it would in a normal cycle. Now, the length of estrus cycle differs from different species, and as does the length of pregnancy. So that's all I'm going to look at, be concerned with this chart. The estrus cycle is 21 days in the cow, 17 in a ewe, 21 in a pig, and 21 in the horse. The pregnancy length in a cow is about 9 months. The ewe is 148 days, so it's just over 4 months. The sow, it's kind of funny because they say a sow is 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days, and that's exactly what it is. And then in a mare, it's right at 11 months. The environment has the ability to significantly influence reproduction. We see this quite often with heat stress and Angus cows. We see it with climate and weather. We have, if there's a really harsh winter, reproduction can be affected if it's extremely hot, or extremely stressful, or if there's any natural disasters, reproduction can also be affected. Another influence significantly low is the nutrition. Animals need their nutrients to maintain themselves. And so that's going to be first. Animal will always use its nutrients for maintenance first, and then excess energy can be partitioned to reproduction. So if energy is limited, then reproduction cannot occur. Well, some species and some diets can also cause major issues in livestock or domestic species. And one example we use is fescue. There's a thing called fescue toxicosis that we see in cattle quite often, but also fescue can cause mares to abort their foals in in the later term of pregnancy. Then finally, stress. Stress disrupts very a very wide range of physiological processes, and one of these, of course, would be fertility. Another thing we have associated with the environment is reproductive responses are very much affected by the length of day or the daylight that's available. We see this in chickens in terms of a lot of them, especially outdoor chickens, will stop laying when the day length gets shorter and colder outside in the winter. We also see this in our other species our domestic species. So in sheep, these are called short day breeders. And that means they get pregnant when the days are getting shorter. So that would be in the fall. They're going to exhibit estrus in the fall. And then, and as they approach winter, but then they're going to go into a period of anestrus. And anestrus means just not having estrus. And so they will not breed naturally outside of this seasonally polyestrous period. The reason being is because their gestation is about 145 days. So naturally, they have evolved to cycle to become pregnant in the fall so that about 4.5 months later, they can lamb out in the spring. And they want to lamb in the spring because some of the pests are down, the grass and forages are green and lush, and the environment is basically going to be more ideal to promote the survival of species, of their offspring. Horses, on the other hand, are what we call long day breeders. That means that they undergo estrus in the spring to early summer, and that's when the day length is getting longer. But remember, horses have an 11-month gestation cycle, so they are also set up or kind of programmed to be able to foal out in the spring, and as related to evolution in the environments, because that's the time when their young is more likely to survive. Some species are considered to be polyestrous, which is where they have more than one estrus cycle during a breeding season. So sheep can come in, they're seasonally polyestrous, and they'll have anywhere from a couple to 10, 12 cycles before they'll stop, whereas others will only have one estrus cycle a year and then stop. Puberty is another thing that can be heavily controlled by the environment as well as the diet. Puberty is when an animal is able to become, sexually mature, be able to reproduce. So we talked about whether classification systems, whether or not they were sexually mature or immature. Well, they become mature through the process of puberty. It's associated with also the presence of secondary sex characteristics, and these can be humps on the neck in bulls, mammary development in female, or in humans, especially males, you see a lot of facial hair start to develop. Now, the timing of puberty is a relationship between age and weight, and all of this is associated with nutrition. And partially why it matters whether or not you give your younger animals a diet that is basically healthy. What we're seeing here is 4 groups of animals, and they're fed different planes of nutrition. So you can just think of this bottom one as a low plane of nutrition, top one as a high plane of nutrition, and the ones in the middle as intermediate. Now, what it's showing basically is that this black box is the time in which these animals would be expected to hit puberty. And so those that are on a high plane of nutrition hit puberty at a younger age than those that are on a low plane of nutrition. And you see, this was in sheep, and the difference is about 9 months, 9-month difference in the age, which is a big deal basically when you're trying to get your animals bred so that you can have offspring, which would bring in money and increase productivity of your overall enterprise. Now, the timing of puberty, like I said, is age, weight, and nutritional status. So all of those play in. However, we think of it more of animals needing to have a particular age and weight before puberty can occur, but we recognize that weight itself is what's indicative of that nutritional status. Okay. Gestation. Again, gestation is a process of basically carrying the pregnancy or being pregnant, and it occurs after successful timing of ovulation and mating. If the fertilization doesn't occur, then the oocyte, which is the ovulated egg, will just degenerate. Again, progesterone is dominating during pregnancy, and without that progesterone, the animal would abort. So the animal needs these high levels of progesterone to be able to maintain that pregnancy. If the animal's not pregnant, again, this is just stating that prostaglandin F2 alpha will be signaled by the uterus to regress the corpus luteum. Oh, moving on. So parturition. Parturition is the process of giving birth, and it has various names on various species. When a female starts to prepare for parturition, you'll see behavioral changes, and these include being restless, isolation, and discomfort. And as someone who's had a child, this is a very non-comfortable time when you are very large, very pregnant, and about to pop out a baby. There's also physical changes we can observe in the animal. So this would help indicate a producer. So swelling of the vulva, engorgement of the udder. So the udder is going to start to fill with milk as the cows or the pig or whatever animal is preparing to give birth. And then there'll be some relaxation of ligaments because they're still going to have to dilate and be able to physically push their offspring out of their reproductive tract, out of the uterus. Birth. Before birth, there is the expulsion of a water bag, which releases fluid that would typically surround the fetus. And typically you want the fetus to be front feet first, with its head lying between its legs. The last phase of parturition then is the expulsion of the membranes. Once the animal is born, then it has to drink milk right away, and this first milk is called colostrum. And we have mentioned this before, but colostrum confers this passive immunity to the young, meaning it's giving antibodies from the mother to help protect the neonate. All right, so again, this is looking at parturition. Like I said, you want the feet first, head in between the legs. This would be the ideal position for the parturition, basically for the animal to come out. If we have feet down, both feet down, the head's down, head's back, any of these will cause dystocia, which is basically problems giving birth. And in cattle and some other animals, you actually have to go out and pull that animal out. So in livestock or in domestic species, you want animals that naturally can give birth the proper way because it reduces the amount of time and energy it takes in managing the reproductive herd or the breeding herd. When it comes to reproduction, we have a lot of technology that we can use. I swear that dog. We have an ultrasound. We have estrous synchronization, which I'm going to go through these a little bit more. We have artificial insemination, which is when we collect sperm from a male and use it to inseminate another female. This is basically done where there's a tube taken and you put it in through the vagina, into the cervix, and release sperm just on the other side of the cervix so that you can come in contact with the ova. We have two things known as in vitro fertilization or intracytoplasmic sperm injection, or ICSI. So IVF and ICSI, these are basically where fertilization occurs in a lab. And then we have embryo transfer. Do you want to watch this? So I'm not going to have you guys watch this. You can come back and watch it later. It talks about how we do pregnancy diagnosis and rectally palpate. But basically, like I said before, we come in through the rectum. With our arm, we'll have our scanner face down. So most of the time we'll do transrectal. There is this convex, but convex is more used in vets doing, companion species. Occasionally you'll see a vet use it in sheep, but for the most part we use transrectal probes. Take the probe, go in through the rectum and look face down, and then we can scan over and see the reproductive tract. So this is an example of that process, basically coming in through the rectum. We have the probe, and then we're able to see the different structures. So I'm going to show you some of these structures, and then we're going to take a quiz to see if you guys learn anything. So please pay attention. I'm going to stop share. Okay. Hope I haven't lost you yet. No one's asleep, but I feel like somebody's missing. Yep, somebody disappeared, but that's fine. Oh, Jade, she's back now.
We're the Kellys.
Sleep.
Our dream is to protect our baby's future.
When it comes to parenting,
One thing I want to note before we look at this is when we look at an ultrasound, it's sending waves through and it's bouncing back when it comes into contact with something. Liquid or water or any of that is going to come back as black. So fluids are going to be black, whereas tissues and dense tissues, you'll see various levels and things that look like gray area. So this is just of the follicles. So here, this is the entire ovary. And what you can see here is follicles. So it's these big fluid-filled bubbles on the ovary. This is the corpus luteum. So we have still the ovary here. This is other tissues on the outside. This is still a follicle. The corpus luteum is this huge structure, and it has kind of a different, it's a different gray basically. It has a different texture than the rest of the ovary. So that's what it's showing you as the corpus luteum. Right, I'm not worried about a cyst. Oh my goodness. Now this one is going to show you, it's going to show you, show you the different stages of egg, how it develops, and what you'll be able to see on the ultrasound. here, these are the membranes outside. The uterus is on the outside. This is fluid that would be surrounding the embryo. And then this is the embryo. And you can see it developing here. Again, this is still the embryo right in the middle, and this is all fluid associated with the pregnancy. So this is its skull that you can see here. Rostrum's this direction. This would be the caudal part of the cranium, the skull or the cranium. All right, we don't need to look at a dead fetus. But here also, this is the spinal cord, the rib cage forming. And so it's pretty cool that you can actually see these different structures. All right. In just a moment. Yeah, it's amniotic fluid, Julie. Now we're going to take a quiz, but there's one more thing I want to show you before we take the quiz. I need to pull up an image because when you look at it, remember the bladder sits right beside the reproductive tract. And you can end up having a problem where if you think you're seeing the tract or a pregnancy, but what you're really seeing is the bladder. Sorry, I'm having a hard time finding a good picture to show you. Okay. So this is the bladder, and bladder, you can tell a difference from it because it's actually thicker. It has a more rigid, more sound wall on the outside versus the pregnancy. It's gonna kind of be wavier, etc. Well, it's got a bladder stone, I think. To tell you the truth, that's not a baby. Let's see. Embryo. There's gonna, when you look around, it'll be wavier. You move the wand around and it has different pockets of fluid. It's not one solid structure. And so I'm going to play a video and it's basically a little quiz. And I want you to guys write whether or not you think it is pregnant or not pregnant based on what you observed in the development in the last video. If somebody gets them all correct, I'll let them decide if they want let's see. I'll let them decide if they want their own extra credit on the quiz or if they want to share that with the class. So let's see what happens.
Okay, we've got our gun loaded, we've got it protected within the.
I feel like he was yelling at us. All right, can you guys see the video that's taking forever to load? Quiz, pregnant or open questions. Can you see that? Unless someone speaks up, I'm gonna say yes. Okay. We're gonna restart because that was really slow. All right, so I'm gonna help you out with this one because this is the bladder. This is all the bladder. So watch the bladder and what it looks like when it moves around on the screen. So since that's the bladder, this one is obviously open. These rings that you're seeing in the middle of the screen, those are actually cross sections of the uterus. And so what you're seeing, this is the structure of an open uterus. There's also an ovary in there, but don't worry about it. Again, that's the uterus. The cross sections of the uterus are those rings. When you see that mess where it goes dark, it basically means you have poop on your probe. Number 4. What is that structure? You may not know. That's fine.
I said open.
Yes, definitely open. Number 2, Alexis, what did you think?
Open? My head hurt looking at those.
Oh yeah, it definitely takes some getting used to. It's easier when you're doing the scanning because you know what you're looking for as well. So yes, 2 was open. 3, did Simon run away on purpose? Oh, hi Simon. You're next on my screen. So what do you think number 3 was?
I thought it was pregnant.
Pregnant? Nope, 3 was a trick. 3 was actually open. Though, granted, on number 3, they did a horrible job scanning it. So, you know, good try. Number 4, LeVar.
Said pregnant.
Yes, 4 was definitely pregnant. Good job. What about number 5, Emily?
I put pregnant.
5 was actually open. It was another trick. 6, Grayson.
Pregnant.
Yes, definitely pregnant. And 7, Trinity.
I put pregnant, but I wasn't 100% sure.
Yeah, definitely pregnant. On 7, and on some of them, what they actually did was they scanned and kind of showed you some of either the embryo or the fluid or some of the placental attachments, which is was only really evident in number 6. And then they would try to scan the ovaries. And so they would look for the ovaries to see what structures were present. So in a couple of them, they would show you the embryo and then they would show you the ovary and there was some corpus luteums. But that was a little bit corpus lutea. And that was a little bit, you know, beyond what I was trying to get at with you guys. Did anyone get them all correct? Besides me, obviously. Just kidding. Michaela and Julie got them correct. And LeVar, look at you guys. Okay. Should we take their word for it? Everyone trust them? Hallie trusts them. Okay, awesome. So do you guys each want 7 extra credit points on your exam? Or do you want the entire class to get a 5-point curve?
Entire class get a 5-point for my vote. I don't know about them, but I got y'all.
Okay, what about you, LeVar? It's up to you.
I also agree.
You also agree? Oh, look at you, kind people. All right, that's it. Everybody gets 5 points added to their exam for your participation. All right, 5 bonus points. If I forget to add those, someone just tell me, because you know me. Awesome, 5 bonus points. We have 10 minutes. I'm going to show you a couple things real fast, and then I'll let you go. There's a couple more videos that y'all, TR, your comment. There are a couple things or videos that you can go back and watch if you're interested in them, but they're not, major requirements if you don't want to. All right. Well, maybe I know what I'm doing. Okay. All right, so in your module, I guess, you had to look at some of the hormones and the drugs that are used to synchronize estrus. So when we say we're going to synchronize estrus, we're basically just saying we're going to make all the animals cycle at the same time and ovulate on or about the same time. And this is a tool used for basically to help with management and to help make sure that you're having offspring at ideal times to meet the required or the appropriate market to get the most money. And so this can be a big deal in some of the industry, not used at the Berea College farm, but UK uses it. And one of these drugs that can be used is called Lutalize, which is basically just giving prostaglandin F2 alpha. And so if you come in and in an estrus cycle, the majority of the animals are going to be in their luteal phase. So you can give one shot of Lutalize, and it's basically acting, it will go ahead and regress that CL. And so whether the animals in any of these point in their cycle, they're all going to have that corpus luteum be regressed, and then they're going to come into ovulation. So that's one method we use. Another one is what we call a CIDR, and a CIDR, CIGDR, controlled internal drug releasing device. It is basically progesterone. It's like an IUD in humans, except it just sits in the vagina of the animals, and it mimics this luteal phase. So it makes the body think that there's always a corpus luteum there, even if there's not. Next, we can give GnRH or GnRH or gonadotropin analogs. And so GnRH, we can either give GnRH, which is not done all that often. It's more common to give what we call gonadotropin-like analogs, which would be mimicking LH and FSH. And the gonadotropin analogs is what we see in the drug, well, that's GnRH. The analogs are what we see in PG 600, which your homework asked about. And that's made up of ECG and HCG, which has LH and FSH-like activities. So ECG is equine chorionic gonadotropin, which is a hormone that comes from horses, and HCG is one that comes from humans. Now, obviously, now we can make them in a lab. We don't have to have, pregnant horses to extract hormones from, but that's where they come from, is pregnant animals naturally. Artificial insemination, again, is taking that sperm and injecting it either in the cervix or just past the cervix in the animal. And it's synonymous with something called intrauterine insemination in humans. So it actually is a process that occurs in humans. In humans, though, no one's sticking their arm up the rectum. We have these other technologies or techniques, the IVF. IVF is basically where ova is in a droplet and then sperm is put in that droplet and they can be fertilized there. Versus this ICSI, which is where one sperm is directly injected into an egg. So this is an ova or an egg, This picture was actually done in humans, though this is not animals. But the ova looks the same. The outside is called a zona pellucida. It's kind of like a mammalian version of an eggshell, though it's not like calcified like a shell in chickens. And they just stick this needle and inject sperm directly into the egg, and then fertilization will occur. It skips a couple steps and basically just starts developing like it would after the sperm has already made its way into. So they'll swap genomes and start dividing into the new embryo. This other process known as embryo transfer, which is basically where fertilized embryos of one cow of a genetic merit will be taken and implanted into recipient cows, so a donor into recipient cows, to have basically twins, all these twins. Or so this cow would have been the one of genetic merit, or the one they wanted to do. They took her eggs and they're fertilized, flushed, and then put into all of these beef cows. And then the beef cows are like surrogates that carry that cow to term. And then all of these are siblings. This is done when genetics are wanting to be bred into a herd or into something at a more rapid rate, or if there's one cow that has tremendously more superior genetics than another. They undergo a process called superovulation. If you're interested, you can look it up. There are some videos and things that exist. All right, and then in poultry, I'm not going to read it all to you. Basically, in females, there's only one functional ovary, and the yolk moves through an oviduct and through a tract that kind of has some similarities and differences from a mammalian tract. So I'll show you that here. Make sure you review these slides. But I'm bringing this one up because I definitely asked you this exact question on the quiz, so pay attention. The top is the ova. It's an egg. The ovum, just like in mammals, very similar. And all of this is all the ovary. Goes into the infundibulum, which is the funnel that catches it, just like in mammals. And then goes on into what we call the magnum, down into the isthmus. And all of this is the oviduct. So again, there's some similarities in terminology here. Then we have the uterus, which is also the shell gland, followed by the vagina, and then the cloaca. The cloaca is where the rectum comes in contact as well, because this is the rectum. Rectum, vagina, all excreted or laid through the cloaca. And then there's a right atrophy tract. So this is the left tract with the left ovary, the only functional one. The right one is not functioning. In the males, there are some differences and similarities as well. There's an epididymis that's right here, connected to the testes, down the vas deferens. So that's the same similar ordeal. Connects to the cloaca, which is also where the rectum comes in. There's a phallus, which is a structure, as well as a vent. So pay attention to this one. It is on your quiz as well. All right, with that, I am going to stop for the day.